The contract felt like ice in Zara's trembling hands as she sat in the marble-covered office, staring at words that would change her life forever. $2 million to carry a stranger's child. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The man across from her, William Cross, looked nothing like someone with only months to live. His eyes were sharp and alert, his handshake firm, and though he seemed tired, there was an energy about him that didn't match the story his assistant had told her about his terminal illness. "Miss Johnson," William said, his voice steady and deep, "I understand this is unusual, but time is not on my side." He gestured to the thick stack of papers. "The medical reports are all there. Stage 4 cancer. 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky." Zara's dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the expensive paintings and the view of the city below. At 23 she had never seen this much wealth in one place. Her apartment in the projects could fit in this office 3 times over. Her mother's medical bills were drowning her, and her job at the diner barely covered rent. This money could save everything, but why did her stomach feel like it was full of stones? "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There must be hundreds of women who would do this. Women with better education, better backgrounds. William's assistant, a thin man named Richard who had recruited her, stepped forward. "Mr. Cross has very specific requirements. You're healthy, young and—" He paused, glancing at his boss. "You need the money enough to not ask too many questions." The words stung, but they were true. Zara had been working double shifts for 2 years, trying to pay for her mother's heart surgery. When Richard had approached her at the diner last week, she thought it was a joke. Rich men didn't pay poor girls to have their babies. That was something from movies, not real life. "The pregnancy will be through artificial insemination," William explained, his tone professional but not unkind. "You'll live in a secure apartment, have the best medical care, and once the child is born you'll receive the full payment. The contract includes health insurance for your mother as well." Zara's heart jumped. Her mother didn't know about this meeting, didn't know that her daughter was considering something so desperate. But the thought of finally being able to afford the surgery, of not watching her mother struggle to breathe every night, made her grip the pen tighter. "What happens after?" she asked. "Do I ever see the child?" "That's not part of the arrangement," Richard said quickly. "Mr. Cross will raise the child alone. You'll sign away all parental rights." William held up a hand, silencing his assistant. "Miss Johnson, I won't lie to you. This is a business arrangement. I need an heir and I need one quickly. You need money. But I'm not a monster. If circumstances allow, and if you want to be part of the child's life in some way, we can discuss it when the time comes." There was something in his voice, a gentleness that didn't match the cold business deal being presented. Zara studied his face. He was probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair that had touches of gray at the temples and green eyes that seemed to see right through her. He didn't look sick, but she had learned that illness could hide behind healthy faces. "I need to think about it," she said, setting the pen down. "Of course," William nodded. "But I do need an answer by tomorrow. Time is—" He coughed slightly. "Time is important." As Zara stood to leave, she noticed something odd. On William's desk was a small pill bottle, but when she glanced at the label, she couldn't make out what it was for. Most cancer patients she knew talked openly about their medications, but William seemed to shield it from view. "Miss Johnson," William called as she reached the door. "For what it's worth, I hope this helps your mother. Richard told me about her condition." Zara turned back, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "Thank you." Walking out of the building, Zara felt like she was in a dream. The city streets seemed louder, the air thicker. $2 million. It was more money than she could earn in 20 years at the diner. But something nagged at her, something beyond the obvious strangeness of the situation. That night, she sat by her mother's bedside in their small apartment. Linda Johnson was only 45, but the heart disease had aged her beyond her years. She slept fitfully, her breathing labored even with the oxygen tank. "I'm going to fix this, Mama," Zara whispered. "I promise." But as she tried to sleep, questions swirled in her mind. Why had Richard sought her out specifically? How had he even known about her mother's condition? And why did William Cross, a man who supposedly had months to live, seem so very much alive? The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. Zara had barely slept, and when she arrived at the diner for her shift, she found Richard waiting for her in a corner booth. "Have you decided?" he asked without preamble. Zara poured herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "I have questions first." "I'm sure you do, but time is a luxury Mr. Cross doesn't have. Why the rush? If he's dying anyway, what difference do a few more days make?" Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Every day matters when you're fighting for your life, Miss Johnson. Every single day. There was something in his tone that made Zara's skin crawl. She had dealt with enough difficult customers at the diner to recognize when someone was hiding something, and Richard was definitely hiding something. I want to see his medical records myself, she said firmly. Not just reports anyone could fake, but real records from real doctors. Richard's face hardened. That's not how this works. You either trust the arrangement or you don't. Then I don't. Zara started to walk away, but Richard grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, and for a moment she saw something dark flash in his eyes. Your mother doesn't have months to wait for her surgery, he said quietly. We both know that. This is your only chance to save her. The threat was clear even though it was wrapped in concern. Zara pulled her arm free, her heart racing. How did he know so much about her mother's timeline? The doctors had been vague about how long they had, but Richard seemed to know something specific. I'll give you my answer tonight, she said, backing away from him. You'd better, Richard replied. Because opportunities like this don't come around twice. As Zara watched him leave, she realized that this wasn't just about having a baby for money. Something much bigger was happening, something that involved not just her and William Cross, but other people with their own plans. And somehow she was right in the middle of it. That evening she made her decision. Not because she trusted Richard or because the situation felt right, but because her mother's breathing had gotten worse during the day, and the fear of losing her outweighed everything else. She would sign the contract. But she would also start asking questions that Richard clearly didn't want her to ask. Because if she was going to bring a child into this world, she needed to know what kind of world she was bringing them into. And something told her that once she signed those papers, there would be no going back. The apartment William had provided was nothing like anything Zara had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, the kitchen had more gadgets than a restaurant, and the bedroom was larger than her entire previous home. But despite the luxury, she felt like a prisoner. Richard checked on her daily, always asking the same questions about her health, her mood, her compliance with the strict schedule they had given her. It had been 2 weeks since the artificial insemination procedure, and Zara was beginning to understand that this arrangement was far more complicated than anyone had told her. For starters, she barely saw William Cross. The man who had hired her to carry his child seemed to have disappeared entirely, leaving all communication to Richard. Mr. Cross is very ill, Richard explained when she asked. He's undergoing intensive treatment. It's better if he doesn't have too much stress right now. But Zara had done her research. She had called every major hospital in the city, claiming to be William's concerned neighbor, and none of them had any record of him being a patient. She had also spent hours online reading about his company and his public appearances. The most recent photos of him were from just 3 weeks ago at a charity gala, and he looked perfectly healthy. The more she investigated, the more convinced she became that something was very wrong. The breakthrough came by accident. Zara had been taking her daily walk in the building's garden when she heard familiar voices from an open window above. Richard was talking to someone and they were arguing. He's getting suspicious, Richard was saying. Yesterday he asked me why he felt so tired all the time. Then increase the dose, came another voice, male but not William's. We can't afford for him to figure it out now, not when we're so close. What if it kills him too quickly? We need him alive for at least another month. Better dead than suspicious. Dead we can handle. Suspicious gets us caught. Zara's blood ran cold. They were talking about killing someone, and from the context it had to be William. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to hear more. What about the girl? Richard asked. She's perfect. Young, desperate, no real family except the sick mother. When William dies, she'll be blamed for everything. Who's going to believe that a poor girl from the projects didn't seduce him and then poison him for his money? And the baby? We'll take care of that problem when we come to it. Zara's hand instinctively went to her stomach. She wasn't even sure she was pregnant yet, but these men were already planning to hurt her unborn child. She had to get away from the window before they saw her, but her legs felt like they were made of water. The important thing is that William keeps taking his vitamins, the unknown voice continued. As long as he trusts you, we're fine. Vitamins. Zara remembered the pill bottle she had seen on William's desk. They weren't treating his cancer, they were poisoning him. And somehow she was part of their plan. That night, Zara couldn't sleep. Every sound in the apartment made her jump and she kept checking the locks on the doors. She needed to warn William, but how could she reach him when Richard controlled all contact between them? The answer came the next morning when Richard arrived for his daily check-in. Instead of her usual compliance, Zara decided to test him. "I'd like to see Mr. Cross," she said as he reviewed her temperature charts and meal logs. "I've explained that's not possible right now. I'm having second thoughts about this whole arrangement. I think I want to back out." Richard's pen stopped moving. When he looked up, his expression was colder than she had ever seen it. "That's not an option, Miss Johnson. You've signed a contract. Contracts can be broken. I'll pay back whatever money I've received. It's not about the money anymore." Richard stood up, and suddenly the spacious apartment felt very small. "You've been inseminated with Mr. Cross's genetic material. If you're pregnant, that child is legally his heir. You can't just walk away." "Watch me," Zara said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. Richard moved faster than she expected, blocking her path. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in." "I understand perfectly. You and whoever you were talking to yesterday are slowly killing William Cross, and you're planning to frame me for it." The words hung in the air between them. Richard's face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and finally, a cold calculation that terrified Zara more than his anger had. "You've been listening to conversations that don't concern you," he said quietly. "They concern me when I'm being set up to take the blame for murder." Richard moved toward her, and Zara knew she had made a terrible mistake. She should have played dumb, should have pretended she didn't know anything. Now she was trapped in a room with a man who was planning to kill his boss and frame her for it. "Here's what's going to happen," Richard said, his voice eerily calm. "You're going to forget what you think you heard. You're going to stay in this apartment, follow the schedule, and have Mr. Cross's baby. And if you try to leave or contact anyone, your mother's heart medication will suddenly become very hard to find." The threat hit Zara like a physical blow. "You wouldn't try me." But even as fear flooded through her, Zara realized something important. Richard was scared too. If he and his partner were confident in their plan, they wouldn't need to threaten her. They needed her cooperation, which meant she had more power than she thought. "I want to see William," she said again, this time with more strength in her voice. "If you don't let me see him, I'll find a way to reach him myself. And I'll tell him everything." Richard stared at her for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "We have a problem." While he talked in low tones, Zara tried to plan her next move. She needed to get to William, but she also needed to protect her mother. Richard's threat wasn't empty. She could tell from his tone that he was capable of following through. "Fine," Richard said, hanging up. "You can see Mr. Cross. But it will be on our terms at a time and place we choose. And if you say anything, to upset him or make him suspicious, the deal is off. Do you understand?" Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Someone will pick you up tomorrow morning. Dress nicely, and remember, as far as William knows, you're just the woman carrying his child. Nothing more, nothing less." After Richard left, Zara sat on the expensive couch and tried to process what she had learned. William Cross wasn't dying of cancer. He was being slowly poisoned by people he trusted. She was carrying his child, or at least she might be, and she was being set up to take the blame when he died. But she had also learned something else. The men behind this were making mistakes. They were overconfident and they underestimated her. Richard assumed that because she was poor and desperate, she was also stupid. That was going to be his downfall. Tomorrow she would see William. And somehow she would find a way to warn him without getting them both killed. Because she was starting to realize that this wasn't just about money or even about having a baby. This was about survival. And Zara Johnson had been surviving all her life. The black car that picked up Zara the next morning felt more like a hearse than a taxi. Richard sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at her with those cold eyes that seemed to see right through her pretense of calm. She had spent the night rehearsing what she would say to William, how she could warn him without triggering Richard's suspicions. "Remember," Richard said as they pulled up to a modest house in an upscale neighborhood, "you're here because Mr. Cross wanted to check on your well-being. Nothing more. Keep the conversation light." The house surprised Zara. She had expected another marble palace like his office, but this was a comfortable family home with a garden and a front porch. It looked like the kind of place where people actually lived, not just where they conducted business. William answered the door himself, and Zara had to hide her shock. In just 3 weeks he had changed dramatically. His face was gaunt, his skin had a grayish tinge, and he moved like every step required effort. But his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, and when he looked at her there was something there that hadn't been in his office, genuine warmth. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to see how you were feeling." I'm fine, Zara replied, acutely aware of Richard standing behind her like a guard. How are you? William's smile was tired but real. Some days are better than others. Please come in. The inside of the house was as welcoming as the outside, filled with comfortable furniture and family photos. Zara noticed pictures of William with a woman who must have been his wife, and with a young boy who looked like him. Both the woman and child were absent from the more recent photos. My wife and son, William said, noticing her attention. They died in a car accident 3 years ago. I'm sorry, Zara said, and meant it. The pain in his voice was real and deep. It's why having another child means so much to me, William continued. I know our arrangement isn't conventional, but I hope you understand that this baby will be loved. Zara felt tears prick her eyes. This man wasn't the cold businessman she had imagined. He was a father who had lost everything and was trying to build a family again, not knowing that the people closest to him were slowly killing him. Mr. Cross, Richard interrupted, perhaps we should discuss the medical updates. Of course. William gestured toward the living room. Please sit. Can I get you anything? Coffee? I'll make it, Richard said quickly. You should rest. As Richard disappeared into the kitchen, William settled into a chair across from Zara. She could hear the sound of running water and cabinet doors opening, and she realized this might be her only chance to speak privately. Mr. Cross, she began, keeping her voice low, I need to ask you something and I need you to trust me. Something in her tone made him lean forward, suddenly alert. What is it? The vitamins you're taking, who gives them to you? William's eyebrows drew together. Richard brings them with my other medications. Why? What other medications? I thought you were getting treatment at the hospital. I am, but Richard handles most of the coordination with my doctors. He's been with me for 5 years ever since. William paused, studying her face. Why are you asking these questions? Zara could hear Richard moving around in the kitchen, and she knew she was running out of time. Because I don't think you're as sick as everyone says you are. And I think someone wants you to believe you're dying. William went very still. For a moment, the only sound was the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible. What do you know? I know that no hospital in the city has any record of treating you for cancer. I know that Richard has been meeting with someone else, talking about increasing doses of something. And I know they're planning to blame me when you die. The color drained from William's already pale face. That's impossible. Richard is like family to me. He's been handling all my medical appointments, my medications. When was the last time you actually saw a doctor? Not Richard telling you what the doctor said, but you actually sitting in an examination room? William started to answer, then stopped. His eyes grew wide as realization dawned. Oh my God, he whispered. The sound of footsteps made them both look up. Richard was returning with a tray of tea, but something in his expression told Zara that he had been listening. Here we are, Richard said cheerfully, setting the tray down. I made your favorite, William. The herbal blend that helps with your nausea. William stared at the cup like it was a snake. Richard, I've been thinking. Maybe I should get a second opinion on my treatment. See a different oncologist. That's not necessary, Richard said, his voice taking on a firm edge. Dr. Morrison is the best in the city. You don't want to confuse your treatment by involving too many doctors. But I've never actually met Dr. Morrison, William said slowly. You've always said he was too busy to meet with me directly. Richard's smile became strained. He's a very important man, William. He doesn't have time for personal consultations with every patient. Every patient? But I thought I was his only terminal case right now. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Richard looked back and forth between William and Zara, and she could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much they knew. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Richard said finally. William, you're not thinking clearly. The medication affects your memory sometimes. My memory is fine, William said, standing up despite his obvious weakness. And I want to see my medical records. All of them. Tonight. That's not possible. Then I'll get them myself. William moved toward the phone, but Richard stepped in front of him. I can't let you do that. The pretense was gone now. Richard wasn't trying to act like a concerned assistant anymore. He was blocking William's path to the phone, and there was something dangerous in his posture. Let me guess, William said, his voice deadly quiet. There are no medical records because there is no Dr. Morrison. There is no cancer. You've been poisoning me. It's not personal, William. It's just business. Business. William's voice cracked with emotion. You've been with me for 5 years. You were at my wife's funeral. You helped me plan my son's birthday parties. And now I'm helping someone else plan your funeral. Richard reached into his jacket and Zara realized with horror that he was going for something, probably a syringe with whatever poison he had been using. But William was weak from months of being drugged and Zara was closer. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy teapot from the tray and swung it at Richard's head. The ceramic shattered against his skull and he staggered backward, cursing. "Run!" Zara shouted to William. But William was already moving, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the back door. Behind them, Richard was shouting into his phone, calling for backup. They made it to the garden before Zara heard car doors slamming in the front driveway. William was breathing hard, his face gray with exertion, but he kept moving. "There's a gate in the back fence," he gasped. "Leads to the next street." As they ran through the garden, Zara realized that everything had changed. She wasn't just carrying William's child anymore, she was his partner in survival. And somewhere behind them, Richard and his associates were planning to kill them both. But she had also realized something else. William wasn't as weak as he appeared. The months of poison had taken their toll, but underneath the sickness was still a strong, intelligent man who had built a business empire from nothing. If they could stay alive long enough for the poison to clear his system, they might actually have a chance. They made it through the gate just as shouts erupted from the house behind them. On the street, William hailed a taxi, and they climbed in just as black cars came racing around the corner. "Where to?" the driver asked. William and Zara looked at each other. They were both thinking the same thing. Where could they go that would be safe? Richard knew where Zara lived, knew where her mother was. He probably knew all of William's properties and associates. "The bus station," Zara said finally. "And please hurry." As the taxi pulled away, she saw Richard standing in the garden, his head bandaged, talking rapidly into his phone. His eyes met hers through the rear window, and she saw a promise there that made her blood run cold. This was far from over. The motel room smelled like disinfectant and old cigarettes, but it was the safest place they could find on short notice. William sat on one of the twin beds, his head in his hands, while Zara paced by the window, occasionally peering through the blinds at the parking lot below. "I can't believe I was so stupid," William said for the third time in an hour. 5 years. Richard has been with me for 5 years, and I never suspected anything." "You trusted him," Zara said, turning away from the window. "That's not stupid, that's human." They had been at the motel for 6 hours, paying cash for the room and trying to figure out their next move. William had used a payphone to call his bank, only to discover that Richard had frozen his accounts, claiming that William was mentally incompetent due to his illness. "He's been planning this for a long time," William said, finally looking up. "The medical appointments that never happened, the treatments that were just poison, the isolation from my other friends and business associates. He's been cutting me off from everyone who might have questioned what was happening." Zara sat on the other bed facing him. In the harsh light of the motel room, she could see that he was still very sick, but there was more clarity in his eyes than there had been at the house. Already, just hours away from Richard's vitamins, he seemed stronger. "We need to figure out who else is involved," she said. "Richard didn't plan this alone. Someone else was in that room when I heard them talking. It has to be someone close to me, someone who would benefit from my death." William rubbed his temples. "My brother Thomas would inherit everything if I died without an heir. Would he really try to kill you?" William's laugh was bitter. "Thomas has always resented me. Our father left the business to me instead of him, even though Thomas is older. He's been waiting 20 years for a chance at what he thinks should be his." Zara thought about the conversation she had overheard. The second voice had been confident, commanding. It fit with someone who felt entitled to give orders. "What about the baby?" she asked quietly. William looked at her, and for the first time since they had fled his house, his expression softened. "Are you pregnant?" "I don't know yet. It's too early to tell. If you are, that child changes everything. Richard and Thomas can't inherit if I have a legitimate heir. Is that all this is to you? A way to keep your brother from getting your money?" The question came out sharper than Zara had intended, but she needed to know. Was she just a vessel for his revenge against his family, or was there something more? William was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "When I first came up with this plan, that's exactly what it was. I was dying or thought I was, and I wanted to make sure Thomas didn't get everything I had worked for. But now I'm starting to think that maybe I wasn't just looking for an heir. Maybe I was looking for a reason to keep fighting." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Zara felt her heart beat faster, but she pushed the feeling away. They were in danger, running for their lives, and this wasn't the time for complicated emotions. "We need to focus on staying alive," she said. "You're right." William stood up, moving to the small table where he had spread out everything they knew about Richard and Thomas's plan. "But I want you to know that whatever happens, I don't see you as just a way to get back at my brother. You saved my life today." Zara joined him at the table, trying to ignore the way her skin tingled when their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same piece of paper. "So what's our next move?" she asked. "We need proof. Something that will convince the police that Richard has been poisoning me and that Thomas is behind it." "How do we get proof when we can't go to your house, your office, or anywhere they might expect us?" William smiled, and for the first time, Zara saw a glimpse of the man who had built a business empire. "We make them come to us." Over the next several hours they worked out a plan. It was risky, maybe even foolish, but it was the only way they could think of to get the evidence they needed. William would call Thomas, tell him that he was dying and wanted to make peace before the end. He would ask Thomas to meet him at a neutral location, a public place where they could record the conversation without being in too much danger. "What if he doesn't come?" Zara asked. "He'll come. Thomas has been waiting too long for this moment to pass it up. His ego won't let him stay away. And what if he brings Richard and a bunch of other people with him? Then we run." Again. Zara looked at William, really looked at him. Despite everything that had happened, despite being poisoned for months and discovering that his most trusted employee was trying to kill him, he still had fight in him. She was beginning to understand how he had become so successful. He didn't give up even when everything seemed hopeless. "There's something else we need to talk about," she said. "What?" "My mother." Richard threatened her. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to expose them, I need to make sure she's safe first." William nodded. "We'll figure that out too. I promise." That night, sharing the small motel room, they talked more than they had in all their previous interactions combined. William told her about his wife and son, about the accident that had taken them and how lost he had felt afterward. Zara talked about growing up poor, about watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about the fear that had driven her to accept Richard's original offer. "I never thought I'd have another family," William admitted as they sat on their respective beds in the dark. "After Sarah and Tommy died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now I'm wondering if maybe it doesn't have to be." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. She was falling for him and she knew it was dangerous. Not just because of the people trying to kill them, but because their relationship had started as a business transaction. How could she trust that his feelings were real and not just gratitude for saving his life? "William," she said softly. "Yes." "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I don't regret any of this. Even the scary parts." "Neither do I." In the morning they would put their plan into action. They would try to outsmart people who had been planning William's murder for months, maybe years. The odds were against them and they both knew it. But lying in the dark of the motel room, listening to each other breathe, they both felt something that had been missing from their lives for a long time. Hope. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover but public enough to be safe, or so they hoped. William sat at a corner table, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap that partially hid his gaunt features. Zara was 3 tables away, pretending to read a magazine while keeping watch for Thomas and Richard. The small recording device William had bought at an electronics store was tucked in his shirt pocket, hopefully hidden from view. Their plan was simple: get Thomas to admit his involvement in the poisoning plot while recording everything. "He's here," Zara said quietly into the cheap cell phone they had bought. She could see Thomas Cross walking through the front door, a tall man in his 40s who looked like a healthier version of William. Thomas spotted his brother immediately and walked over with a concerned expression that might have fooled anyone who didn't know better. "William," Thomas said, sitting down across from him. "You look terrible. Richard told me you wanted to see me." "I'm dying," William said simply. "I wanted to make peace between us before it's too late." Thomas's face showed what appeared to be genuine sadness. "I'm sorry, brother. I know we've had our differences, but I never wanted this." Liar, Zara thought, watching Thomas's performance. If she hadn't overheard that conversation, she might have believed him too. "I've been thinking about our father," William continued. "About how he chose me to run the company instead of you. I know that hurt you. It was a long time ago. But it still bothers you." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Zara could see him calculating how much honesty he could afford. "Yes," he said finally. "It still bothers me. I was the older son. I should have inherited everything." "And now you will," William said. After I'm gone. Don't talk like that. Maybe the doctors are wrong. The doctors? William leaned forward slightly. Which doctors, Thomas? Because I've been wondering about that lately. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, a moment of panic that he quickly covered. Your doctors. The ones Richard has been coordinating with. Funny thing about that. I tried to call Dr. Morrison yesterday. Turns out he doesn't exist. The color drained from Thomas's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. You're confused, William? The medication affects your thinking sometimes. Does it? Or is the medication affecting more than just my thinking? Thomas glanced around the coffee shop nervously. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. The question is, how long have you and Richard been planning this? Thomas stood up abruptly. You're sick, William. You're not thinking clearly. I should go. Sit down, William said firmly. We're not done talking. Actually, we are. Thomas pulled out his phone. Richard, he knows. Yes, he knows everything. Zara's blood ran cold. Thomas was calling Richard, which meant their safe meeting was about to become very unsafe. She stood up and started moving toward William's table, but Thomas saw her coming. Well, Thomas said, ending his call. Miss Johnson. I should have known you were involved in this little drama. Thomas, listen to me, William said, also standing. Whatever Richard promised you, whatever you think you're going to get out of this, it's not worth it. I'm your brother. Thomas laughed, and all pretense of concern disappeared from his face. My brother? You've never treated me like a brother. You've treated me like an employee, someone to be tolerated but never respected. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked my opinion about anything important? When was the last time you included me in a major business decision? You've shut me out of everything that should have been mine by right. William took a step toward Thomas, but his brother backed away. So you decided to kill me? I decided to take what should have been mine in the first place. Richard came to me with a plan. He said it would be easy, that no one would suspect anything if you died of cancer. A tragic illness that took you slowly. And what about Zara? What about the baby? Thomas glanced at Zara with cold eyes. The baby was a complication we didn't expect. But Richard has a plan for that too. When you die, she'll be blamed for seducing you and then poisoning you for your money. A perfect murder-suicide, with the inconvenient heir dying before it can inherit anything. Zara felt sick. They had planned her death from the beginning, and they had planned to kill her unborn child too. You're talking about murdering an innocent woman and child, William said, his voice shaking with rage. I'm talking about protecting what's mine. Do you know what it's been like living in your shadow for 40 years? Watching everyone praise your business genius while treating me like I'm nothing more than your appendage. So this is about your ego? This is about justice. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard and two other men Zara didn't recognize. They walked into the coffee shop like they owned it, and several other customers quickly left, sensing trouble. Gentlemen, Richard said pleasantly as he approached their table. I think we need to have a more private conversation. We're not going anywhere with you, Zara said, moving to stand beside William. Actually, you are. One of Richard's companions opened his jacket just enough to show the handle of a weapon. Unless you want to make a scene that gets innocent people hurt. William looked around the coffee shop. There were still a dozen customers, including a mother with two young children and an elderly couple sharing a piece of cake. He couldn't risk their safety. Fine, he said. But we do this somewhere private. My thoughts exactly, Richard smiled. There's a car waiting outside. As they walked toward the exit, William caught Zara's hand and squeezed it gently. She looked at him and saw determination in his eyes, not defeat. He was planning something and she needed to be ready. The car was a black sedan with tinted windows. Richard gestured for them to get in the back seat while Thomas got in the front passenger seat. The two other men flanked them, making escape impossible. Where are we going? William asked as the car pulled away from the coffee shop. Somewhere we can finish this conversation without interruption, Richard replied. I have to say, William, I'm disappointed in you. I really hoped you would go quietly. Sorry to let you down. And Miss Johnson, I'm particularly disappointed in you. You could have lived comfortably for the rest of your life if you had just followed the plan. The plan to frame me for murder? The plan to give you more money than you could ever spend. But you had to go and develop a conscience. Zara realized they were driving toward the warehouse district, an area full of abandoned buildings where screams wouldn't be heard. Her heart was pounding, but she tried to stay calm. William was still holding her hand, and she could feel him tracing letters on her palm with his finger. "Are you in?" he spelled out. She squeezed his hand once to show she understood. The car pulled up to a deserted warehouse and Richard's men escorted them inside. The building was empty except for some old equipment and a few chairs that had obviously been placed there recently. "Much better," Richard said as they were forced to sit down. "Now we can talk freely." "What's to talk about?" Thomas said. "Let's just get this over with." "Not so fast," Richard held up a hand. "I want William to understand exactly what's going to happen. You see, the official story will be that you became suspicious of Miss Johnson's motives. You discovered that she was slowly poisoning you, trying to kill you for your inheritance. In a struggle you both died, murder-suicide. Very tragic. And you get away with months of slow poisoning. How? What poisoning? Your medical records will show that you died of natural causes, cancer that progressed faster than expected. Miss Johnson's fingerprints will be on the poison bottle, and there will be evidence that she was researching your assets." William nodded slowly as if accepting his fate. But Zara could see him positioning himself, getting ready to move. "There's just one problem with your plan," William said. "What's that?" "This." William suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Richard around the waist and driving him backward into Thomas. The three men went down in a tangle of arms and legs, and in the confusion, Zara ran for the door. "Stop her!" Thomas shouted, but Zara was already outside, running toward the street as fast as she could. Behind her, she could hear shouting and the sounds of a struggle. She wanted to go back for William, but she knew that getting help was more important than getting caught. She made it to the main road and flagged down the first car she saw, a delivery truck whose driver took one look at her panicked face and immediately called 911. Within minutes, police cars were racing toward the warehouse, their sirens wailing. Zara rode with them, praying that they wouldn't be too late. They found William unconscious but alive, with Richard and Thomas standing over him holding what looked like a syringe full of poison. The two other men had fled, but it didn't matter. The police had arrived in time to save William's life and arrest the people who had been trying to end it. As paramedics worked on William, loading him into an ambulance, he looked at Zara and managed a weak smile. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for what?" "For running when I told you to. And for coming back with help." Zara climbed into the ambulance beside him, taking his hand as they raced toward the hospital. "I wasn't going to leave you," she said. "I know. That's why I think I'm falling in love with you." The words should have shocked her, but instead they felt like the most natural thing in the world. Because somewhere between the motel room conversations and the coffee shop confrontation, she had fallen in love with him too. "Good," she said, squeezing his hand. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you too." As the ambulance pulled up to the hospital, Zara realized that their ordeal was finally over. Richard and Thomas would go to prison, William would recover from the months of poisoning, and they would finally be free to explore what was growing between them. But first, they had to make sure that both William and their unborn child, if there was one, survived the aftermath of everything they had been through. The hospital should have been a safe haven, but it quickly became clear that Richard and Thomas had planned for every contingency. As William was being examined by doctors, Zara overheard two nurses talking about how the police had released the men who were arrested at the warehouse due to insufficient evidence. Her blood ran cold. She quickly found the detective who had taken their statements earlier. "What do you mean insufficient evidence?" she demanded. "They had William unconscious and were holding a syringe." Detective Martinez looked uncomfortable. "The syringe contained insulin, not poison. Their lawyer claims Mr. Cross is diabetic and was having an episode. Without proof of the alleged poisoning, we can't hold them." "But the recordings?" "What recordings?" "We didn't find any recording device." Zara's heart sank. In the struggle at the warehouse, the small recorder must have been lost or destroyed. Without it, they had no proof that Thomas and Richard had confessed to slowly poisoning William. "This is insane," she said. "They tried to kill us." "I understand your frustration, Miss Johnson, but without evidence, there's nothing we can do. However, we can provide protection if you feel you're in danger." Protection that would last maybe a few days, Zara thought. Then they would be on their own again, except this time Thomas and Richard would be more careful. She hurried back to William's room, where doctors were running tests to determine what substances were in his system. The months of gradual poisoning had taken a serious toll on his body, but the doctors were optimistic that with time and treatment he would recover completely. "We need to leave," Zara told him as soon as they were alone. "What? Why?" She explained about Thomas and Richard's release, about the missing recording device, about how they were now more vulnerable than ever. William's face hardened. "They planned this too." Richard probably had backup evidence planted to support their story. He's been planning this for years, of course he would have contingencies. So what do we do? Before William could answer, his phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his face went pale. "It's Richard," he said. "Don't answer it." But William was already pressing the accept button. "Hello, Richard. William, my friend, I'm so sorry about the misunderstanding earlier. I hope you understand that Thomas and I were only trying to help when we saw you having what appeared to be a diabetic episode." "Cut the act, Richard. We both know what really happened." "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean. But I am concerned about your mental state. The doctors say that untreated diabetes can cause confusion, paranoid delusions. Perhaps you should consider checking yourself into a facility where you can get proper care." The threat was clear. If William continued to accuse them, they would have him declared mentally incompetent. "And Miss Johnson," Richard continued, "I hope she understands that making false accusations against people who are only trying to help can have serious legal consequences. Especially for someone in her delicate condition." William's hand tightened on the phone. "If you hurt her." "I would never hurt anyone, William. But accidents do happen, especially to people who aren't careful about where they go and who they trust." The line went dead. William looked at Zara with grim determination. "We're leaving. Now. But you're still sick. You need medical treatment." "I'll get treatment somewhere else. Somewhere they can't find us." Within an hour, they had checked out of the hospital against medical advice and were in a rental car heading out of the city. William had managed to access some emergency funds from an account Richard didn't know about, and they had enough cash to disappear for a while. But as they drove through the night, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every set of headlights in the rearview mirror looked suspicious. Every car that stayed behind them for more than a few miles made her heart race. "Where are we going?" she asked as they stopped for gas in a small town 3 hours from the city. "I have a cabin in the mountains. It's under a different name, purchased through a shell company that Richard never had access to. We should be safe there while we figure out our next move." The cabin turned out to be a modest but comfortable retreat nestled in the woods, far from any main roads. It had electricity and running water, but no internet or phone service. A blessing and a curse under the circumstances. For the first few days they focused on William's recovery. The poison was slowly leaving his system and his strength was returning. Zara cooked simple meals and made sure he rested, while he worked on remembering details about Richard's activities that might help them build a case. It was during their 4th night at the cabin that Zara realized she was definitely pregnant. "William," she said as they sat by the fireplace after dinner, "I need to tell you something." He looked up from the legal documents he was reviewing. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant. I took a test this morning and it's positive." William set down his papers and stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. The first genuine smile she had seen since this whole nightmare began. "Really? Really?" He stood up and crossed to where she was sitting, kneeling beside her chair. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," she admitted. "Happy but scared. This isn't exactly how I imagined having my first child." "I know. But maybe this is exactly what we both need. A reason to keep fighting, a reason to build something better." He placed his hand gently on her stomach and Zara felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who had started as a stranger offering her money for a service, had become someone she couldn't imagine living without. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too." They were interrupted by the sound of car engines outside. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast and not bothering to be quiet about it. William was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "They found us." Zara joined him and saw 3 black cars pulling up to the cabin. Richard and Thomas got out of the first car, along with several men she didn't recognize. "How did they find us?" she whispered. "The rental car. They must have traced it somehow." "Back door," William said, grabbing their emergency bag. "We can make it to the woods." But as they reached the back of the cabin, they could see more men positioned in the trees. They were surrounded. "William Cross," Richard's voice came through a bullhorn. "We know you're in there. Come out and let's discuss this like civilized people." "What do we do?" Zara asked. William looked around the cabin, thinking fast. His eyes landed on the propane tank that fed the stove and fireplace. "Can you swim?" he asked. "What?" "There's a stream about 50 yards behind the cabin. It leads to a larger creek, then to the river." "Can you swim?" "Yes, but we're going to create a distraction. When I say run, you head for that stream and you don't stop until you reach the river. Follow it downstream until you find a road. I'm not leaving you." Yes, you are. You're carrying my child, and that makes you more important than I am right now. Before Zara could argue, William was moving, loosening the connection on the propane tank and opening all the gas valves on the stove. What are you doing? Giving us a way out. When this place goes up, it'll cause enough confusion for you to escape. And what about you? I'll be right behind you. But Zara could see in his eyes that he was planning to stay behind, to make sure the distraction worked even if it cost him his life. No, she said firmly. We do this together or not at all. Zara? I said no. I'm not raising this child without its father, and I'm not living the rest of my life knowing that you died to save me. We find another way. William stared at her for a moment, then nodded. Together then. But we have to move fast. He finished his work with the gas, then they moved to the back window. The smell of propane was getting stronger, and William pulled out a book of matches. On 3, he said. 1, 2. He struck the match and tossed it toward the stove, then grabbed Zara's hand and dove through the window just as the cabin exploded behind them. The blast was enormous, lighting up the night sky and sending Richard's men scrambling for cover. In the chaos, William and Zara ran for the stream, crashing through the underbrush as flames lit their way. Behind them, they could hear shouting and the sound of men giving chase. But they had a head start, and the darkness of the forest was on their side. They reached the stream and plunged in, the cold mountain water shocking their systems but hiding their scent from any dogs Richard might have brought. They swam and waded downstream for what felt like hours, until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Finally, exhausted and shivering, they crawled out of the water near a small bridge where the stream met a country road. Now what? Zara asked, her teeth chattering. William looked back toward where the cabin had been. In the distance, they could still see the glow of the fire against the sky. Now we disappear completely, he said. No more half measures, no more trying to play by the rules. Richard and Thomas want to destroy us? Fine. Let's see how they like it when we start fighting back. As they walked down the dark country road toward an uncertain future, Zara realized that their ordeal was far from over. But she also realized that they were stronger together than either of them had been alone. And sometimes, that was enough to win wars that seemed impossible to fight. The small town of Cedar Falls was the kind of place where strangers were noticed but not questioned too closely, especially if they paid cash and kept to themselves. William and Zara had been there for 2 weeks, living in a rented room above a diner, slowly planning their counterattack against Richard and Thomas. William's health was improving daily. The color was returning to his face, his appetite was back, and most importantly, his mind was sharp and clear for the first time in months. The man who had built a business empire was emerging from the fog of poison, and he was angry. I've been thinking about this all wrong, he said one morning as they sat in their small room, surrounded by newspapers and legal documents. I've been trying to prove that Richard poisoned me, but that's not what we need to prove. What do you mean? Zara asked, looking up from the pregnancy book she had been reading. We need to prove that Richard has been stealing from my company. The poisoning was just a means to an end. He needed me incapacitated so he could embezzle money without being caught. William had spent the past few days using public computers at the library to research his own company's financial records. What he found was disturbing but not surprising. Look at this, he said, showing Zara a printout. For the past 8 months, there have been regular transfers to offshore accounts. Small amounts spread out over time, but they add up to almost $2 million. Can you trace where the money went? That's the beauty of it. I don't have to. Richard made one crucial mistake. He used the same shell company for all the transfers. A company that's registered in his name. Zara felt a surge of hope. That's proof of embezzlement. It's more than that. It's proof of motive. Richard wasn't just trying to inherit my money through Thomas. He was actively stealing it while I was alive. But their celebration was short-lived. As William was explaining how they could use this information to build a case, Zara felt a sharp cramp in her lower abdomen. William, she said, her voice tight with pain. He looked up and immediately saw that something was wrong. What is it? I think something's wrong with the baby. The cramping got worse and Zara doubled over. William helped her to the bed, his face pale with worry. We need to get you to a hospital. No, Zara gasped. If we go to a hospital, they'll find us. Richard has people everywhere. I don't care. You and the baby are more important than staying hidden. But before they could decide what to do, the cramping began to ease. Zara lay still for several minutes, waiting to see if it would return. I think it's okay, she said finally. I think it was just stress. William sat beside her on the bed, taking her hand. This has to end. We can't keep living like this, running and hiding and putting you and the baby at risk. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop running and start fighting back. We have proof that Richard is a thief. We use that to destroy him before he can destroy us. Over the next few hours they worked out a plan. It was risky, but it was better than spending the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. William would use his financial evidence to expose Richard's embezzlement, but not through the police, through the business community. Richard's reputation was everything to him. If William could prove that Richard was a thief, no one in the business world would ever trust him again. I still have friends in the industry, William explained. People who knew me before Richard started isolating me. If I can get this information to them, they'll make sure it gets to the right people. But how do we contact them without Richard finding out? William smiled grimly. We don't hide from Richard anymore. We invite him to find us. The plan was simple but dangerous. William would reach out to his old business partner, Jonathan Hayes, and arrange a meeting. He would tell Jonathan everything about the poisoning, about Thomas's involvement, about Richard's embezzlement. And he would do it in a way that Richard would inevitably find out about. You want Richard to know where we are? Zara asked. I want Richard to think he's walking into a trap that he can control. What he won't know is that we're the ones setting the trap. Jonathan Hayes agreed to meet them at his office on a Saturday when the building would be mostly empty. William had worked with Jonathan for 15 years, and he was one of the few people who had questioned Richard's sudden control over William's medical care. I knew something was wrong, Jonathan said as they sat in his office, reviewing the financial documents William had gathered. You would never have made these kinds of business decisions if you were thinking clearly. Because I wasn't thinking clearly. Richard was slowly poisoning me while stealing my money. Jonathan studied the embezzlement evidence carefully. As one of the city's most respected business attorneys, his word carried significant weight in the financial community. This is enough to destroy him, Jonathan said finally. But William, you realize that going public with this puts you in danger. Richard will know his scheme is exposed. That's what we're counting on. Jonathan looked confused, so William explained the rest of their plan. They wanted Richard to make a desperate move, to do something that would finally give them the evidence they needed to put him in prison. You're using yourselves as bait, Jonathan said. We're ending this, William replied. One way or another. That evening, as they waited in their motel room for Richard to make his move, Zara felt the baby kick for the first time. It was just a tiny flutter, barely noticeable, but it filled her with a fierce determination to protect this new life. I felt the baby move, she told William. He placed his hand on her stomach, his face full of wonder. Really? Really? I think it's going to be okay. All of this, it's going to be okay. William leaned down and kissed her gently. I love you. Both of you. I love you too. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. William looked through the peephole and saw Jonathan standing outside looking nervous. He's alone, William told Zara, then opened the door. We have a problem, Jonathan said as he entered. Richard knows about our meeting. He called me an hour ago demanding to know what you told me. What did you say? I told him the truth, that you had proof he was embezzling money from your company. But William, he didn't sound surprised. He sounded prepared. William and Zara exchanged glances. They had expected Richard to find out about the meeting, but his lack of surprise was troubling. There's something else, Jonathan continued. Richard said he wanted to meet with you tomorrow to clear up this misunderstanding. He suggested the warehouse district, said he wanted somewhere private where you could talk without interruption. The same area where they tried to kill us before, Zara said. It's obviously a trap, William agreed. But maybe that's what we need. If we can get Richard to admit what he's done in front of witnesses. What witnesses? Jonathan asked. William smiled grimly. The police. And the media. It's time to make this public. As they worked out the final details of their plan, Zara realized that tomorrow would determine everything. Either they would finally get the justice they deserved, or Richard would succeed in silencing them permanently. But feeling the baby move inside her had given her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She was fighting not just for herself and William now, but for their child's future. And she was not going to lose. The abandoned parking garage was the perfect place for a final confrontation. Multiple exits, good acoustics for recording equipment, and enough open space to see any ambush coming. William and Zara arrived an hour early, along with Jonathan and two police detectives who had finally agreed to help them set a trap for Richard. Detective Martinez, the same officer who had been frustrated by the lack of evidence weeks earlier, was now fully convinced of Richard's guilt after seeing the embezzlement records. "We'll be positioned on the upper levels," he explained as they tested the wireless recording equipment William would be wearing. "The moment Richard admits to anything criminal, we move in." "And if he doesn't admit anything?" Zara asked. "Then we hope the embezzlement charges are enough to put him away." But they all knew that wouldn't be enough. Richard had been careful to cover his tracks, and a good lawyer might be able to explain away the financial irregularities. They needed a confession to the poisoning and attempted murder. William checked his watch. "He'll be here soon." Zara squeezed his hand. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure. We end this today one way or another." Right on time, Richard's black sedan pulled into the parking garage, followed by a second car carrying Thomas and two other men. But as the cars parked, Zara noticed something that made her heart race. "William," she said quietly, "look at the entrance." Two more cars had appeared, blocking the exit they had planned to use if things went wrong. Richard had brought more men than expected, and he was clearly prepared for more than just a conversation. "Looks like our friend is taking this seriously," Detective Martinez said through William's earpiece. "We're ready to move if needed." Richard approached with Thomas at his side, both men looking confident and relaxed. Too relaxed for people who were about to be accused of attempted murder. "William," Richard said pleasantly, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding is that I trusted you," William replied, making sure his voice was clear for the recording equipment. "I understand you're upset about the financial discrepancies Jonathan showed you, but I can explain everything. Those transfers were legitimate business expenses, authorized by you during your illness." "I never authorized anything. I was too sick to make business decisions, remember? Too poisoned to think clearly." Richard's smile didn't waver. "Poisoned? William, you had cancer. You still have cancer. The confusion and paranoia are symptoms of your illness." "Show him," Thomas said suddenly. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "Your latest medical records, William. From Dr. Morrison himself." William took the folder with steady hands, though Zara could see the tension in his jaw. Inside were official-looking medical documents showing advanced cancer, with a prognosis of only weeks to live. "These are fake," William said. "Are they?" "Dr. Morrison is a real doctor, William. He's been treating you for months. The fact that you don't remember your appointments is just another symptom of your condition." Zara felt a chill of fear. If Richard had somehow created false medical records and found a doctor willing to back up his story, it would be William's word against official documentation. "I want to see Dr. Morrison myself," William said. "That's not possible," Thomas interjected. "He's out of the country at a medical conference. But he left detailed instructions for your care." Richard pulled out a small bottle of pills. "Your medication, William. You've missed several doses, which is why you're having these paranoid episodes. Those aren't medication. Those are poison. William, please. You're embarrassing yourself. And you're putting Miss Johnson in a very difficult position." Richard turned to Zara with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Miss Johnson, surely you can see that William needs help. Professional help. The kind of help he can only get in a medical facility." The implication was clear. They wanted to have William committed to a psychiatric facility, where he would be completely under their control. "He's not crazy," Zara said firmly. "You've been poisoning him for months." "Have I? Then surely you have some proof of these serious accusations." "We have proof that you've been embezzling money from his company." Richard laughed. "You have proof that I've been managing his finances while he's been too ill to do it himself. That's called being a good employee, not embezzlement." William realized they were losing the battle. Richard had prepared for every accusation, every piece of evidence they thought they had. But there was one thing Richard couldn't have prepared for. "Tell me about the vitamins," William said suddenly. "What vitamins?" "The special vitamins you brought me every day. The ones that were supposed to help with my cancer treatment." Richard's confidence flickered for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. The brown bottle with the white pills. You said they were a special supplement that Dr. Morrison recommended." "William, you're confused." "No, I'm not. I remember everything now. You came to my house every morning with those vitamins. You watched me take them. You made sure I swallowed every single one." Richard glanced at Thomas, and Zara saw something pass between them, a moment of uncertainty. "And you know what's funny about those vitamins?" William continued. "I had them tested." This was a lie, but Richard didn't know that. William had no way to test the vitamins, but he was betting that Richard's confidence would crack under pressure. "You're bluffing," Richard said, but his voice was less steady than before. Am I? Jonathan, would you like to tell them what the lab found? Jonathan, following William's lead, nodded gravely. Arsenic. Small doses, but enough to cause the symptoms William was experiencing. Richard's face went white. That's impossible. Is it? Because I think you've been slowly poisoning me for months, making me sick enough to be dependent on you while you stole my money and planned my death. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. Because I still have some of those vitamins. And when the police test them, they're going to find exactly what we found. This was another bluff. William had no vitamins to test. But Richard didn't know that either. You're lying, Thomas said, but he sounded less certain than his partner. Thomas, how long have you been part of this? William asked. Did Richard come to you with the plan or did you go to him? I don't have to listen to this. You don't have to listen, but you should probably think about what happens when Richard decides you're a liability. How long before he starts putting something in your morning coffee? Thomas looked at Richard with sudden suspicion. What is he talking about? He's trying to turn us against each other, Richard said quickly. Don't listen to him. But what if he's right? What if you really have been poisoning him? Of course I've been poisoning him. Richard exploded. How else were we supposed to get control of his company? You think he was just going to hand it over to you? The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Richard realized what he had said, but it was too late to take it back. Did you get that? William asked quietly, touching his earpiece. We got it, Detective Martinez replied. Moving in now. Richard reached for something in his jacket, but before he could draw whatever weapon he was carrying, police officers appeared from the stairwells on multiple levels, their guns drawn. Nobody move. Martinez shouted. Police. Thomas immediately put his hands up, but Richard was backing toward one of the cars, his hands still inside his jacket. It's over, Richard, William said. You confessed to everything. It's over. No, it's not over. It's not over until you're dead. Richard pulled out a gun and pointed it at William, but Zara was faster. She threw herself between them just as the shot rang out. The bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her to the concrete floor. William dove toward her as police officers rushed Richard, tackling him and wrestling the gun away. Zara? William knelt beside her, pressing his hands against the wound to stop the bleeding. Stay with me. The baby, she gasped. Is the baby okay? The baby's fine. You're going to be fine. Help is coming. Paramedics arrived within minutes, working quickly to stabilize Zara before loading her into an ambulance. William rode with her, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. I love you, he whispered as they raced toward the hospital. Love you too, she managed to say. Both of you. At the hospital, William paced the waiting room while doctors worked on Zara. The bullet had missed any vital organs, but they needed to make sure there was no damage to the baby. Detective Martinez found him there an hour later. Richard and Thomas are both in custody, he reported. Richard is being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and a half-dozen other crimes. Thomas is cooperating, claiming Richard manipulated him. What about the other men? We got 2 of them. The others ran, but we'll find them. William nodded, but his attention was focused on the doors leading to the surgical wing. He needed to know that Zara and the baby were safe. Finally, a doctor emerged with good news. The bullet went clean through her shoulder. No major damage and the baby is fine. She's going to make a full recovery. William felt his knees go weak with relief. Can I see her? She's awake and asking for you. Zara was pale but alert when William entered her room. Her left arm was in a sling, but she managed to smile when she saw him. How do you feel? He asked, taking her good hand. Like I got shot, she said with a weak laugh. But the doctor says the baby is okay. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. No, it's not. Richard and Thomas made their choices. We just made sure they paid for them. William sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jar her injured shoulder. When I saw you get shot, when I thought I might lose you and the baby. But you didn't lose us. We're here, we're safe, and Richard is going to prison for a very long time. What happens now? Zara squeezed his hand. Now we start living our lives instead of just surviving them. Over the next few days, as Zara recovered in the hospital, the full scope of Richard's crimes came to light. He had been embezzling money for over a year, slowly poisoning William while manipulating him into signing documents that gave Richard more and more control over the business. Thomas, faced with evidence of his brother's slow murder, agreed to testify against Richard in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would serve time for conspiracy, but nothing compared to what Richard was facing. The media picked up the story, and suddenly William and Zara found themselves at the center of a scandal that made headlines across the country. Billionaire's assistant tried to murder him for his fortune, read one newspaper. Poor girl saves rich man's life and wins his heart, read another. But William and Zara ignored the headlines. They were focused on more important things, like the fact that Zara was now definitely showing her pregnancy progressing normally despite everything they had been through. "I've been thinking," William said as they sat in her hospital room on her last day there. "About names." "Already? We don't even know if it's a boy or girl yet." "I know. But I want the baby to have a name that means something. Something that reminds us of how we fought for this family." Zara smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "Hope. Whether it's a boy or girl, I want to name the baby Hope." Tears filled Zara's eyes. After everything they had been through, after all the fear and running and fighting, Hope was exactly what their child represented. "Hope Cross," she said, testing the sound of it. "I like it." "Hope Cross Johnson," William corrected. "If you'll have me." Zara stared at him. "Are you?" William slid off the bed and onto one knee, pulling a simple diamond ring from his pocket. "Zara Johnson, will you marry me? Not because of the baby, not because of what we've been through, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." As William slipped the ring onto her finger, Zara realized that her life had come full circle. She had started this journey as a desperate woman willing to do anything to save her mother. Now she was an engaged woman with a baby on the way, a man who loved her, and a future that was brighter than anything she had ever dared to imagine. "What about my mother?" she asked suddenly. "The surgery, the medical bills?" "Already taken care of," William said. "She's scheduled for surgery next week with the best cardiac surgeon in the country. And she's going to be fine." "How did you?" "I called her yesterday and explained everything. She's very excited about becoming a grandmother." As they left the hospital together, William and Zara walked into a future that was uncertain but full of promise. Richard was awaiting trial, Thomas was facing his own legal consequences, and there would be months of testimony and legal proceedings ahead. But they had each other, they had their unborn child, and they had the kind of love that could survive anything, even attempted murder. "Ready to go home?" William asked as they got into the car. "Where is home?" Zara asked. William took her hand, the engagement ring catching the light. "Wherever we are together." 3 months later, Zara's pregnancy was showing beautifully, and William had fully recovered from the months of poisoning. They had moved into a new house, smaller than William's previous mansion but perfect for a growing family. The legal proceedings against Richard and Thomas were moving forward, but slowly, and their lawyers were putting up a fierce fight. That's when everything went wrong again. Zara was at home alone, reading in the nursery they were preparing for Hope, when she heard a car door slam outside. Looking through the window, she saw a familiar figure walking toward the house, Richard's lawyer, Martin Fletcher. But Fletcher wasn't alone. He was with a woman Zara didn't recognize, and they both looked official and determined. The doorbell rang and Zara considered not answering it. But she knew that would only delay whatever they had come to say. "Miss Johnson," Fletcher said when she opened the door. "This is Dr. Patricia Reeves from Child Protective Services." Zara's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "We need to discuss your pregnancy and the welfare of your unborn child," Dr. Reeves said. "May we come in?" Against her better judgment, Zara let them into the living room. Dr. Reeves pulled out a thick file and set it on the coffee table. "Miss Johnson, we've received information suggesting that your child may be in danger." "What kind of information?" Fletcher leaned forward with a cold smile. "Information suggesting that you've been using illegal drugs during your pregnancy, and that you've been involved in violent criminal activities that put your unborn child at risk." "That's ridiculous. I haven't used drugs, and the only violence I've been involved in was defending myself against people trying to kill me." "Nevertheless," Dr. Reeves continued, "we're going to need you to submit to drug testing, and we may need to place you under medical supervision for the remainder of your pregnancy." Zara realized what was happening. Richard, even from jail, was still trying to destroy them. If they could prove that Zara was an unfit mother, they could take Hope away as soon as the baby was born. "I want to call my lawyer," Zara said. "Of course," Fletcher replied. "But I should mention that we also have concerns about Mr. Cross's fitness as a father, given his recent mental health issues and history of paranoid delusions. He was being poisoned. That's why he seemed paranoid." "So he claims." "But the medical records show a pattern of erratic behavior and poor judgment that goes back years." Zara felt trapped. Even though Richard was in jail, he had apparently been planning this final attack for months. False medical records, manufactured evidence, corrupt officials. He had built a case that could destroy their family even if he went to prison. She was reaching for her phone to call William when she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. Different from the cramping she had experienced before, sharper, more urgent. "Oh no," she gasped, doubling over. Dr. Reeves was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong with the baby." The pain intensified and Zara felt wetness between her legs. She looked down and saw blood. "We need to get you to a hospital," Dr. Reeves said, her professional demeanor taking over from her official business. "But the baby, it's too early." "The baby will be fine, but we need to go now." As they rushed to the hospital, Zara managed to call William. He met them at the emergency room, his face white with fear when he saw Zara being wheeled in on a gurney. "What happened?" he demanded. "Premature labor," the doctor explained. "We're going to try to stop it, but we need to be prepared for the possibility that the baby will be born tonight." "But it's too early. She's only 6 months along." "Babies born at this stage have a good chance of survival with proper medical care. But we need to focus on stabilizing both mother and child right now." Over the next several hours, doctors worked to stop Zara's premature labor. The stress of the morning's confrontation with Fletcher and Dr. Reeves had triggered the early contractions, and now Hope's life hung in the balance. William stayed by Zara's side, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness from the pain medication. "I'm scared," she whispered during one of her lucid moments. "I know. But Hope is strong just like her mother. She's going to be fine." "What if they take her away? What if Richard's plan works?" "It won't work. I promise you they're not taking our daughter." But even as William said the words, he wasn't sure how he could keep that promise. Fletcher and Dr. Reeves were waiting in the hospital lobby, ready to take Hope into protective custody the moment she was born if they could prove their fabricated case. That's when William realized what he had to do. "I'll be right back," he told Zara. "Where are you going?" "To end this. Once and for all." William left the maternity ward and took the elevator down to the jail ward of the hospital, where Richard was being held under medical supervision. He had been claiming chest pains for weeks, probably trying to delay his trial, and was now a patient as well as a prisoner. "I want to see Richard Hartley," William told the guard. "Visiting hours are. I'm the victim in his case. I have a right to see him." The guard considered this, then led William to Richard's room. Richard was sitting up in bed, looking healthier than he had any right to, with a smug expression that didn't change when William entered. Well, Richard said. "Come to gloat. I've come to make you a deal." "I'm not interested in any deals. My lawyer says I have a good chance of beating these charges." "Your lawyer is lying to you. We have your confession on tape. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." "Maybe. But even if I do, I'm taking you down with me. Your precious Zara is about to lose that baby, and when she does, it'll be taken into protective custody. You'll never see your child." William felt rage building inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What do you want?" "I want you to admit that you were having paranoid delusions. I want you to testify that I was only trying to help you, and that your accusations against me were the result of mental illness." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I'll call off Fletcher and Dr. Reeves. Your baby stays with you." William stared at Richard for a long moment. The man who had tried to kill him was now trying to bargain with his daughter's life. "No," William said finally. "No. I'm not making deals with you anymore. Instead, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. You're going to call Fletcher right now and tell him to drop this custody case. You're going to admit that the evidence against Zara is fabricated." "Or what?" William leaned closer to Richard's bed. "Or I'm going to make sure that everyone in prison knows exactly what you did. How you slowly poisoned a man who trusted you like family. How you tried to kill a pregnant woman. Do you know what prisoners do to people who hurt children and pregnant women?" Richard's confidence flickered. "You're bluffing." "Try me. I know people in the system, Richard. People who can make sure your stay in prison is very, very unpleasant." For the first time since William had known him, Richard looked genuinely frightened. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm promising you. Call Fletcher now or spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Richard stared at William for a long moment, then reached for the phone beside his bed. "Fletcher? It's me. Call off the custody case." "Yes, I'm sure." "Drop it entirely." He hung up and glared at William. "There. Happy now?" "Getting there." William left Richard's room and returned to the maternity ward, where he found that the doctors had successfully stopped Zara's labor. She would need to stay in the hospital for observation, but Hope was safe for now. "How did it go?" Zara asked weakly. "It's over. Fletcher is dropping the custody case." "How did you manage that?" William smiled grimly. "I reminded Richard that even in prison actions have consequences." Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway looking embarrassed. "Miss Johnson, I owe you an apology. It appears that the information we received was inaccurate. We're dropping our investigation." After she left, Zara looked at William with admiration. "You really did it? You ended this." "We ended it. Together." As they sat in the hospital room, holding hands and feeling Hope move safely inside Zara's womb, they both realized that their ordeal was finally, truly over. Richard would go to prison, Thomas would face his own consequences, and they would be free to raise their daughter in peace. "I love you," Zara said. "I love you too. Both of you." Outside their window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was the most beautiful sunset either of them had ever seen. 6 months later, Hope Cross-Johnson entered the world on a warm spring morning, healthy and perfect despite her earlier threats to arrive early. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit, crying lustily to announce her arrival to the world. William held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face. After losing his first family in a car accident, he had never thought he would experience this joy again. "She's beautiful," he whispered to Zara, who was exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed. "She's perfect," Zara agreed, watching her husband cradle their daughter. "Just like her daddy." The hospital room was filled with flowers and balloons, gifts from friends and family who had supported them through their ordeal. Zara's mother, Linda, had made a full recovery from her heart surgery and was now a devoted grandmother-to-be. Jonathan Hayes had become like family to them, and even Detective Martinez had stopped by to congratulate them. "Any word on the trial?" Zara asked as William reluctantly handed Hope back to her. "Richard pled guilty to all charges yesterday. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole." "And Thomas?" 3 years for conspiracy. He'll be out in 18 months with good behavior." Zara nodded. Thomas had genuinely seemed to regret his part in the plot, and his testimony had been crucial in convicting Richard. While she couldn't forgive him for trying to have William killed, she understood that he had been manipulated by Richard's promises of wealth and power. "So it's really over," she said. "It's really over." William sat on the edge of the bed looking at his wife and daughter. "You know, a year ago I thought my life was ending. I thought I was dying alone, with nothing to show for my existence except money and a business empire. And now I have everything that actually matters. A wife who loves me, a daughter who's going to grow up knowing she's cherished, and a future that's about more than just accumulating wealth. What are you going to do with the company?" William had been thinking about that a lot lately. His business had always been his life, but now he had more important priorities. "I'm stepping back. Jonathan is going to run the day-to-day operations while I focus on being a husband and father. I want to be there for Hope's first steps, her first words, her first day of school." "You're sure? That company is your legacy." "No," William said, touching Hope's tiny hand. "She's my legacy. She and any other children we might have." "Other children?" Zara raised an eyebrow. "Let me recover from this one first." William laughed, the sound filling the hospital room with joy. "Fair enough. But I'm just saying this house we bought has 4 bedrooms. William Cross, are you planning to fill all of them?" "Maybe," he grinned. "If you're willing." Zara looked at her husband holding their daughter, and her heart filled with a happiness she had never imagined possible. A year ago, she had been a desperate young woman working double shifts and watching her mother slowly die. She had accepted a stranger's offer to bear his child because she had no other choice. Now she was a wife, a mother, and a woman who had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. "Ask me again in a couple of years," she said, smiling. "Deal." A nurse came in to check on them, and they reluctantly prepared for the discharge process. They were taking Hope home to a house filled with love, to a life that they had fought to build together. As they drove through the city streets, Hope sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Zara reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the running, the danger, it had all led them here to this perfect spring day with their perfect daughter. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked as if reading her thoughts. "The way we met, the circumstances that brought us together?" "Never," Zara said without hesitation. "Even the scary parts led us to Hope. How could I regret anything that gave us her? I love you, Mrs. Cross Johnson. I love you too, Mr. Cross Johnson. They pulled into the driveway of their home, where Linda was waiting on the porch with tears of joy in her eyes. She had never imagined she would live to see her daughter married and starting a family, but here she was, healthy and whole and ready to spoil her granddaughter. "Welcome home, little Hope," Zara whispered as they carried the baby into the house. The nursery was painted in soft yellows and greens, filled with stuffed animals and children's books. A rocking chair sat by the window, where Zara would spend countless hours in the coming months, nursing Hope and watching her grow. As William laid Hope in her crib for the first time, the baby opened her green eyes and looked around with the alert curiosity that would characterize her personality throughout her life. "What do you think, Hope?" William asked softly. "Do you like your new home?" Hope gurgled and waved her tiny fists as if giving her approval. That evening, after Linda had gone home and Hope was sleeping peacefully, William and Zara sat on their back porch, watching the sunset and planning their future. "I want to start a foundation," Zara said suddenly. "What kind of foundation?" "For mothers like I was. Single mothers with sick children who can't afford medical care. I want to help them so they never have to make the kind of desperate choices I had to make." William smiled. "That's a beautiful idea. We'll call it the Hope Foundation. You do that? Use your money to help people like me?" "Zara, your compassion and strength are the reasons I fell in love with you. Of course I want to support that. Besides, what good is money if you can't use it to make the world better?" As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, they talked about their plans for the foundation, about the kind of life they wanted to give Hope, about the family traditions they wanted to create. "Do you think she'll ask about how we met someday?" Zara wondered. "Probably. What will we tell her?" "The truth. That sometimes life puts you in impossible situations, but if you're brave enough to fight for what matters, everything can turn out better than you ever dreamed." William took Zara's hand, the engagement ring he had given her catching the light from the house. Soon they would add a wedding band to it, making their union official in the eyes of the law as well as in their hearts. "I can't wait to marry you," he said. "When do you want to have the wedding?" "Tomorrow if you want. Or we can wait until Hope is old enough to be our flower girl." Zara laughed. "Let's compromise. 6 months from now, when I've lost the baby weight and Hope is old enough to travel. I want a real wedding with my mother there and all our friends." "Whatever you want." As they prepared for bed that night, checking on Hope one more time before turning in, Zara marveled at how much her life had changed. She had gone from desperation to hope, from loneliness to love, from fear to security. "Thank you," she whispered to William as they lay in bed together. "For what?" "For seeing me as more than just someone to carry your child. For falling in love with me. For giving me the family I always dreamed of but never thought I could have. Thank you for saving my life. In every way that matters." Outside their bedroom window, the city lights twinkled like stars, and in the nursery down the hall, Hope slept peacefully, dreaming baby dreams of love and safety. The billionaire who had thought he was dying had found life again. The poor girl who had felt trapped by circumstances had found freedom and love. And together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate sorrows. It wasn't the beginning they would have chosen, but it was the perfect beginning for the life they were building together. A life filled with love, hope, and the endless possibilities that come when two people commit to facing the future as one. As Zara drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges and new joys. But whatever came, they would face it together, William, Zara, and Hope, a family forged in adversity and strengthened by love.